Good evening, everyone. It is 6:01 p.m. Central Time, 6/10/2025 here in Texas. We are experiencing so many crazy things in the world. Rioters are rioting, warriors are warring, people are dying, people are having sex and doing drugs. But we don't care about any of that, do we, Smokey?
No, we don't.
And why is that? Why don't we care?
We have philosophy.
Damn straight we do. So, as I understand it today, we actually have something a little bit interesting. We have quite a bit of text that we're going to get through, and then we're pretty light on the slides. I'm curious to see how that'll come up. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because, you got one last week, it was one paragraph, three slides, heavy, deep thoughts and everything. And then this week, it's more like we kind of talked about everything that we're about to read, but he hasn't written it down yet.
Okay. Interesting.
So, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about you got to be careful when you're reading because you start reading things into what was written.
Sure.
And I think once we start reading it, you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you can fit the word reading into one more sentence before you get started.
Yeah. So here we go. So like last week, primary substances, secondary substances, right?
Hmm.
And everything is made up either of a primary substance or something else that we call secondary.
Okay.
And so he says of secondary substance, the species is more truly substance than the genus, being more nearly related to primary substance. For if anyone should render an account of what a primary substance is, he would render a more instructive account and one more proper to the subject by stating the species than by stating the genus. Thus, he would give a more instructive account of an individual man by stating that he was a man than by stating that he was an animal. For the former description is peculiar to the individual in a greater degree, while the latter is too general. Again, the man who gives an account of the nature of an individual tree will give a more instructive account by mentioning the species tree than by mentioning the genus plant.
Okay. So before we continue right here,
Yep.
as the way I'm putting this in my head is that there's a sliding scale between presence in the subject and predicability in the subject.
Okay.
So when you go into secondary substances, what he's saying is that there's more presence. So it's more instructive because there's less work to do with the predicability.
You're getting there. Don't use
Okay.
the word sliding scale
Okay. Okay. I'll think about that. We'll keep going.
because a sliding scale is a measure.
Okay. 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 All right. All right. All right. Yeah. I'll figure out how to reframe that in
You're
my head.
getting there. You're getting
So
there. Your
close.
language
Yeah.
is just a little rough, but you're right.
Okay. Yeah.
Your thought process is correct. Your language use is what's throwing us off.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right. Moreover, primary substances are most properly called substances in virtue of the fact that they are the entities which underlie everything else, and that everything else is either predicated of them or present in them. Now, the same relationship which subsists between primary substance and everything else also subsists between the species and the genus. For the species is to the genus as subject is to predicate, since the genus is predicated of the species, whereas the species cannot be predicated of the genus. Thus, we have a second ground for asserting that the species is more truly substance than the genus.
Mm. Okay.
Are you catching where he's going?
Very much. Yeah, I get this.
Okay. Of species themselves, except in the case of such as are genera, no one is more truly substance than another. We should not give a more appropriate account of the individual man by stating the species to which he belonged than we should of an individual horse by adopting the same method of definition. In the same way of primary substances, no one is more truly substance than another. An individual is not more truly substance than an individual ox.
Okay, so to make sure I'm understanding this, he's saying that referring to a horse as a horse informs us as much about the horse as referring to a man as a man would about the man.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And you can't say that a horse is more of of
Of the
of a
horse.
horse than a man is of a man,
Right, okay. Yeah.
which would make them how in terms of the amount of substance.
Well, equal.
There you go.
Yeah.
And that kind of becomes important later. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. All right.
Okay. Yeah.
We're almost there.
Okay. This is good so far.
It is then with good reason that of all that remains, when we exclude primary substances, we concede to species and genre alone the name secondary substance. For these alone of all the predicates convey a knowledge of primary substance. For it is by stating the species or the genus that we appropriately define any individual man, and we shall make our definition more exact by stating the former than by stating the latter. All other things that we state, such as he is white, that he runs, and so on, are irrelevant to the definition. Thus, it is just that these alone, apart from primary substances, should be called substances. Thus endeth the reading.
I'm going to reread that last one
Okay.
quick here. Um, it is then with good reason that all of, or that of all that remains, when we exclude primary substances, we concede to species and genera alone the name secondary substance. For these alone of all the predicates convey a knowledge of primary substance. Okay. These alone of all the predicates convey a knowledge of primary substance. The wording there is, and it might be in the translation, it's just like, I guess, the fact that something passive is doing an action. I guess what he's saying is that the these alone of all the predicates make available a knowledge of the primary substances, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I guess we would consider that like a direct. He means like a direct link. There's nothing in between the secondary substance and the primary substance. There's just this predicable line that we can draw
Yes.
from one to the other. Okay, okay. For it is by stating the species or the genus that we appropriately define any individual man and we shall make our definition more exact by stating the former than by stating the latter.
The species is more exact than the genus.
Okay.
Former species, latter genus.
Yes, I understand.
Oh, okay. Well, some people don't know that, to be quite honest.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry for being sensitive. I apologize. Um, all other things that we state, such as that he is white, that he runs, and so on, are irrelevant to the definition. Thus, it is just that these alone, apart from primary substances, should be called substances. Okay, yeah. So he's just laying out. He's just really he's just reaffirming that like what secondary and primary substances are, and then he's taking really good care not to like extend further than that. So we also shouldn't.
Yes. So
Okay.
and I'm gonna say something now instead of later. I'll reiterate it later.
Okay.
This is because this is one of those things that just I'm an old man. I'm an old bear and I'm crotchety. If I have a definition for a human,
Yeah.
does it matter what color they are physically? According to this, does it matter what color they are, what their physical attributes are? Does any of that matter in terms of, should it matter when you write up the definition?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to be clear, it's because it's a matter of well, it's a matter of category and then he's now introducing that. Well, I guess he's now reaffirming that it's a matter of hierarchy, right?
Yes.
So the things that you're discussing are, and he's taking great care not to say this. I guess all that he's saying is that the things that you just mentioned are not primary or secondary, right? Um, so if we're talking about secondary substances, then we should only be making secondarily substantive claims about secondary substances,
Yes.
right? Okay. Yeah.
It is
Okay.
just that apart from primary substances, that is, it is just that these alone, apart from primary substances, I can call out these things
Sure.
descriptively, but they aren't, that's not what makes skin color doesn't make a man or a person if we want to be more.
No, I understand. Yeah, no, I completely get this. Where like, um, there's going to be obviously he's going to go further and deeper,
Sure.
but he's doing two things. He's identifying the difference between a primary substance and a secondary substance, and then he's making it clear that a secondary substance isn't everything that is not a primary substance.
Yep.
There's a select set of secondary substances, and then there's a bunch of other stuff that once you go deeper, you'll find that as well.
And you can also see how this is something that can make some people a little bored.
For sure. I mean, this is really tedious,
It
but
is.
also, I
It's very
mean,
tedious.
a lot of the things that a lot of people get very upset about these days are because of a lack of understanding and mutual understanding
Yes.
about what we're going to do with this,
And
right?
and that's why reading something like this is so important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right. Are we ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Uh-oh, what happened? There we go. See, told you. I told you I'd mess it up. Told you
No,
I'd mess
your comedic timing's amazing.
it
That was
up. Okay.
great.
All right. I told you just one slide tonight. That's it. Just one little slide. One little slide. Oops. Here we go. So he
Hmm.
starts off by saying, of secondary substances, the species is more truly substance than the genus. So that's on this left-hand side. Yes?
Yeah.
Genre, species, subject.
Yeah.
For if anyone should render an account of what a primary substance is, he would render a more instructive account and one more proper to the subject by stating the species rather than the genre or
Right.
the genus. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the first paragraph. He just simply saying, if you want to know what the primary substance is of a subject, however you define the species is closer to the subject, and because it's closer to the subject, it's closer to its primary substance than however you define a genre.
Right.
That's that first paragraph.
Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Next
Um.
paragraph. Oh, yes. Question.
No. No. Sorry. Continue.
It says, moreover, primary substances are most properly called substances in virtue of the fact that the entities which underlie everything else and that everything else is either predicated of them or present in them. So if I know what an animal is, there must be characteristics of a man that allow me to get from animal to man.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes. Yeah.
Now the same relation which subsists between primary substance and everything else also exists between the species and the genus. Species and genus. So the definition of man, not the individual man, but
Yeah.
man as a species, has to fit under animal.
Right. Yeah.
And he says, thus, we have a second ground for asserting that the species is more truly substance than the genus. So, whatever it is that makes a man, the individual subject, can be more closely identified by using a definition from species than a definition from genre.
Right.
Because a chicken is an animal.
Yeah.
And this goes back to Diogenes. And everybody's like, behold your man. And it's a featherless biped.
Right, right,
The
right.
old
Yeah.
joke. Well, but that's not really what was going on. And I get it. And everybody loves to tell the joke. And you can read people who say that that's what it was about. I'm not one of those people.
Okay.
It just makes for great discussions by people that don't read philosophy and get on the internet.
Sure.
Um, but the reality is, what we're saying is we can create. And what are we starting to see? What's he creating here? Starts with an H and ends in hierarchy.
Oh, yeah, hierarchy. I
He's
think he's
creating a
already created a hierarchy.
Yeah, he's creating hierarchies.
This is the comment that I was going to make was that he um sorry, there's two thoughts that I have at once. So the comment that I was going to make was that with Socrates with first order principles, or sorry, first orders, right?
Yes.
And then going from there, the whole issue that Aristotle took from day one was that everything's ill-defined. So it's hard for people to work off of that.
Yes.
And all that he's doing is drawing firmer lines and then univocally naming things.
Yes.
That's right. Like I know it's like super reductive. Obviously, this
It
is
is
like
very reductive.
but like at the end of the day, he's like, okay, well, let's actually draw a line here, and then like let's stay true to that, and we're going to give
Yeah.
this name animal, and we're going to give this name man, and then that's what it is, and that's how it'll stay. That way, you guys stop like bouncing around stuff, right?
Yes.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
here's the
that makes a
thing.
lot of sense to me. Yeah.
The beauty of Socrates is he points out our hubris,
Okay.
right? When we were reading Socrates, we laughed a lot, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because we're sitting there and we're making the different voices when we're reading and we're putting the inflection in the tones because it's a conversation. And you hear these words that are 3,000 or 2,500 years old, and you go, "Oh, yeah, that was dumb." But I can hear my uncle saying that. If I remember correctly, at one point you said something similar to that to me. He was you when during one of our readings, you were like, "Well, that's just I've heard people say that."
Yeah.
Uh, and the reality is, you cannot have a conversation on a serious topic without someone saying something that is silly.
Sure. Yeah. That's part of the process.
And
Yeah.
and that's fun. And no matter how great your argument is, somebody can come along and pull one little thread and the whole argument falls apart.
Sure.
Okay. I don't have anything against that. In fact, you know that I thoroughly enjoy that. You know that Socrates is my favorite. He is the gnat. I love the gnat. But the reality is, what Aristotle is doing here, to me, has a different value. He's saying, I'm not going to tear things down. I'm going to try to build a system. And if you like the system, use the system. If you don't like the system, come up with your own system.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's where the I had that other competing thought, which was because these things happen sequentially, we look at it as progress, which it could be progress, but we don't know.
Right.
What it really is it's just different. That's what we know for sure.
Yes.
There's and so what I was had in my head was that I wonder if Socrates would hate this
He
because it
would.
would box him in from like he doesn't get to sit in the gray area where he feels most
Nope.
comfortable. Not
It,
because he's being dishonest, but because that's like
no.
where the most raw consideration happens. He doesn't get to
So,
do that in this framing.
in many respects, Socrates teaches us by making us look at ourselves.
Right.
Aristotle teaches us by saying, here's a method, see if you can follow it.
Right.
See if it
Yeah.
makes sense to you. See if it applies. Modify it accordingly.
Yeah.
And he's introducing these hierarchies. He's introducing these ideas. And so and in the next paragraph, he says, hey, the further you go up the chain, you become less substance.
Right.
The closer you get to the subject, to the predicate, the more substance it is. Never tells you what the
Right.
substance is. So if the definition for man has a more in-depth definition of what the individual man is than the definition that I use from animal. That's all he said.
Sure.
And the reality is he has to say it because of the way he's writing. What do you think Socrates would say?
I have no idea how Socrates
Well,
would.
stop and think about that. Socrates, if
Yeah.
someone came along and said, "There's a man,"
Yeah.
and Socrates would say, "Well, how do you know that that's a man?"
Sure.
And then you would say, and then the person would say, "Well, he's a man because he's walking." Ah, but
Oh,
what about the man, my friend, who lost both of
yeah.
his legs in the battle of?
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly whatever descriptor you would use. Socrates would you ask in all sincerity, like
Yes,
if you say because he's walking, he's going to think like, okay, do you think of like is walking like a core function? Is it a necessary function of being a man? What
yes.
is walking to you?
Is that a
What is
primary
that?
substance?
Yeah, do can people who are not men walk? Like can other animals walk or can only men walk? Like and
Yes.
he's gonna dig into that. Yeah,
And
that
and
makes sense.
and there's nothing wrong with that question. It's a very Socratic question. We hear it all the time. We do it all the time. But that's not an Aristotelian way of looking at the world. The Aristotelian way of looking at the world is saying, I don't know what the substance is. We need to study it. But there
Yeah,
is some substance,
sure.
theoretically, that exists that denotes the subject, man.
Yeah.
And whatever it is, I can lay that into something and I can make it part of a definition, and it becomes part of this definition for a species. And I can take that same substance, and now I can put species under a genre.
It's interesting that
Animal.
both of these guys and what they're doing encourages intense internal critique, but the lens that you're looking at the internal critique through is like so different.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
And
Okay.
this comes to, and I'm going to bring this forward just because we're almost done. I'm going to make one sort of modern comment.
Okay. At
There
your
is
peril.
a
Well, I guess
there
at our
is
peril.
well, and I would hope, anybody that listens to this video will agree with me. Um,
Okay.
Within research, there are two general paradigms, the qualitative and the quantitative.
Sure.
Okay. There is a third paradigm called the mixed.
Sure. Right.
One of the biggest complaints, arguments against belief that it's not a valid paradigm, the mixed one, is because of the perspective.
What the
Because
perspective of people
qualitative,
complaining, or what do you mean the
well,
perspective?
because the idea of qualitative research is really fundamental to the way Socrates looked at the world,
Sure.
and the quantitative method is more akin to what we're reading right now.
Sure.
But the reality is, if you know anything about research, even that statement has problems.
But so explain what you mean by perspective. Are you saying it's the complaints are due to the perspective of the people that, or there's a perspective issue? There's an issue of perspection, like you
Good.
lose
That's
perspection.
the issue.
Oh, that
Most,
one.
yep,
Okay.
most people see qualitative paradigms as Socratic and quantitative paradigms as Aristotelian.
Oh, so they mistakenly believe that they must be incongruent because they think of it that way.
Yes.
Gotcha. So in other words, they're misnaming qualitative and quantitative methods.
Yep.
So because of that, they prevent themselves from being able to effectively mix the two. When
Yes.
you're arguing that you definitely, well, I guess is it are you arguing that you definitely can, or is that something that's
Neither.
generally known?
I'm simply describing a current paradigm, a current attitude among some
Okay.
researchers.
Okay. What's your opinion on
My
mixed methods?
opinion?
Yeah.
My opinion is it's tricky. Well, first of all, my opinion is this idea that qualitative is Socratic and quantitative is Aristotelian is false. I can read Aristotle and see qualitative paradigms. I can read Socrates and see quantitative paradigms. In fact, we've talked about that when we were reading Credo.
Well, it's so funny as you say that because I wasn't expecting you to go in this direction anyway, because
Yep,
I see quantitative and qualitative in this model that you have here.
I agree. That's why I'm
I,
saying when people say
I,
that they cannot coexist, I don't agree. That
right.
Socrates is qualitative and Aristotle is quantitative. I don't agree with that positionality. I understand how some people come to that position, but I don't agree with the position.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say that like even this right here, I'm just going to do a little exchange with myself. Like the individual, like a qualitative would be like a focus on an individual man, which is more substantive but harder to quantify.
Yes.
And then
Well,
learn, and then going from there, studying like the statistics, not the statistics, but doing like a general study of like the animal, right?
right.
It's going to be less substantive but easier to quantify. But then another statement that I think would probably be true, I would think that this is true, is that because it's more easier to quantify, that also makes it more substantive in its and how we
Yes.
use it and apply it, and vice versa the other way. So because of that, there's actually just like this balancing nature, which is why you say that it's tricky. Because like what I would think is probably tricky about mixed methods is not so much about mixing the methods. The tricky part is making sure that you're appropriately naming and defining which parts are qualitative and which parts are quantitative, so nobody gets
Yes.
confused at what goes where when they're reading it.
Yes. And I
Okay.
would further say change your word substantive to subjective.
Well, I was going from less substance to more substance, like
Right, but it's not. That's the issue.
okay.
When you do qualitative, you're looking more at the subject. See,
Oh,
this
so it's literally subjective. I get
it's
what you're saying.
subjective. It is
Right.
the subject.
Right.
The substance is somewhere in between the subject and the species.
Okay. 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 I'm starting to understand now. Oh,
Does that
so
make
in a
sense?
way, looking from there, if you want to maximize the substance that you're getting out of your research, then you want to use mixed methods, so that it's like a
I
Goldilocks zone.
If you use my perspective in the way that I just described it. But if you believe that the individual is the container of all primary substances, then qualitative is the only way to do research.
Yeah, you're disqualifying all other methodology.
Yes. And if you
Okay.
don't believe that substance is within the individual, then you would do quantitative and you would look at the species and you would say, what can I say about these measures that are taken at a higher level that allows me to then look inward at how can I describe the individual based on the measures that I have taken on a large population or large sample
This
of
is why you're
life?
saying that the issue is about perspective, because if somebody has a presupposition like one of the two that you just mentioned, then they've already predetermined for themselves what the answer to the question, is mixed methods
Yes,
good or helpful. So it's not even worth asking that question.
I would not disagree with that statement one bit.
Okay.
And I
That is
would
really
argue that
interesting.
90% of the idiots on the internet would do well to learn that lesson.
Yeah, okay. Damn. That's
And it,
this is fucking wild.
it,
You said that like I'm glad that we went through as much. You made a good call going through all four of these paragraphs. This is coming together really nicely. Hell yeah.
it's almost like I've read this.
No way. That's that's
No,
cap. You're capping right now.
at the end of the day, you have to always recognize that this is this is advanced learning, but have we advanced that far from what he's trying to teach us?
No.
That's the power. That's the power. So many people they believe that if they keep talking and they talk for another 20 minutes, somehow you'll make your point and everyone in the world will believe you and you will have changed hearts and minds.
Yeah.
That's not how strong ideas exist.
It's a quality over quantity sort of thing.
It really is. And the reality is you have to remember, as we'd mentioned earlier, he's writing at a time where we're transitioning between books of wisdom to books of knowledge.
Right.
We're leaving behind you know, the story Hesiod, and we're leaving behind in Homer, and we're leaving behind the fanciful tales, and which to a certain degree Socrates was still pushing in
Sure.
his symposium, and
Uh,
and
yeah.
it's not until the Romans come along a couple hundred years later where they write the in the Enid and Plutarch's Lives, where they sort of have a backlash back to, oh, let's tell the stories of old, and let's talk about the heroes, and then a couple of 100 years later, then you got the Tetrarchy, and all of a sudden it's, oh, I'm going to change my name to Hercules, and your name's going to be Zeus, and I'm,
Yeah. I get
you
what you're saying. Yeah, because like somebody comes to Socrates and they say XYZ question mark, and then Socrates says, I have the perfect story that has the answer that you're looking for.
yes,
And it doesn't matter whether the story is true or not. The point is
no,
that the answer is going to be within the story. That's how I communicate it.
the
That's the
truth.
mode that I use to communicate it, right? And then Aristotle, if somebody comes up to him and says XYZ question mark, he draws a box and then he goes, what do you think's inside the box? Okay, everything else is outside that box.
Yes,
And then you're just mind fucked.
yes.
Like
Well,
holy shit, I never thought of things that way. So like it's just two very different ways of teaching. And yeah, Aristotle's actively catalyzing that transition. He's not
yeah,
just he's a major player in it, which obviously is why we're reading him. He's not just like this isn't just something that happened to be written during that period of time. He's taking part in catalyzing that transition. That's what I'm saying.
and without him, we're still, and the people that came after him, no matter how horrible they were as individuals, without them, we would still be sitting around a campfire telling stories. And there's nothing wrong with it. If you want to go sit in a campfire and tell stories, go for it.
Sure.
But don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
You can visit, but
Yeah.
don't stay.
Yeah. I'm modernizing heavily right now, but I think that's Jordan Peterson's problem. Is
We don't talk about modern idiots.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, yeah, like it made me realize because I listened to him, I watched him talk to a bunch of atheists, and the atheists were, I wouldn't have described it this way before that reading this, but the atheists were speaking through like an Aristotelian lens, and Jordan Peterson was responding Socratically, and so they were both getting super angry at each other.
And yep, yep.
So, damn, holy shit, dude, very cool.
And
Okay,
I don't know
yeah.
what you're talking about, but I would imagine most of the people who were quizzing him weren't doing a very good job.
Nobody was doing a good job. If I would share you the video, but I happen to know that you're a bear with relatively high blood pressure because of all that honey, and I need you alive. So I'm not going to send that to you. You have no idea how many times I see stuff and I'm like, oh, this would piss Smokey off so much. I'm like, like if I wanted to kill you, it'd be so easy. I just like two or three things that's in you. But hey, yeah, dude. Is there anything else you want to cover, or
Nope.
do you want to close up
I
shop here?
This is some really good stuff. We're like I said, we're going to be reading Substances probably for another week, if I remember correctly, maybe another 2 weeks, and then
Okay.
we move beyond Substances because we got 10 of these things to talk about. But the reality is, he spends most of his time, because remember, there's 10 lines, as you put it, that he presents as needed to create categories. Yes?
Right.
So he's
Yeah.
got to talk about all 10.
Yes.
But the reality is, substance, if we go back to, oh, geez, what, second week,
Yeah.
remember he created that 2 by 2
Yes.
substance. Yeah. So substance is one of, if you had to give a hierarchy, he would say that this is one of the more important of the 10. They're
Yeah.
all equal, but substance is more equal than the others.
Substance itself is a more of a primary substance in the
Yes.
like argument that he's posing.
Yes.
Okay. Very cool. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much, as always, for putting this together. To our listeners and viewers, thank you, thank you, thank you for watching and listening to this wonderful stuff that Smokey's putting together here. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and especially if you have any questions or if you have any observations, any critiques, please, please, please do. And we will see you guys Thursday.
Are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
Bye.